Welcome to the Resilient Surgeon, part of the STS Surgical Hot Topics podcast. Our goal with the Resilient Surgeon series is to inspire our colleagues to be their best selves in and out of the operating room, using scientifically proven tools and recovery strategies of the world's top performers. I'm Dr. Michael Mattis, and in each episode, I will talk to game changers who will share evidence-based practices, real-world strategies, and their own personal stories and experiences to help you build your resilience and to help you be your best self no matter what. Our guest today on the Resilient Surgeon is Sheila Heen, and the topic is feedback. Sheila is the Thaddeus Beale Professor of Practice at Harvard University and the co-author of 2 New York Times best-selling books, Difficult Conversations, How to Discuss What Matters Most, and Thanks for the Feedback, The Science and Art of Receiving Feedback Well, even when it's off base, unfair, poorly delivered, and frankly, you're just not in the mood. To say that these 2 books have made a profound impact in the world is a wild understatement. As part of her work as founder of the Triad Consulting Group, Sheila and her colleagues have worked with the likes of Pixar, the National Basketball Association, Ford, American Express, and the Obama White House, to name a few. In addition, she has appeared on all of the most famous podcasts of the day, including 2 appearances on the Tim Ferriss Show. Adam Grant, the organizational psychologist at Wharton, wrote the following about the book, Thanks for the Feedback. Thanks for the Feedback is a potentially life-changing look at one of the toughest but most important parts of life, receiving feedback. It is a roadmap to less defensiveness, more self-awareness, greater learning, and richer relationships. And I couldn't agree more. We are so fortunate to have Sheila on the Resilient Surgeon podcast today. After the interview, as I reflected on our conversation, what struck me so profoundly is Sheila's humanity, warmth, and deep understanding of our human struggles. I decided to try and make the podcast as practical as possible. So I dredged up some feedback that I have had in the past as part of my 360 review while still working at the University of Minnesota, and for some real fun, recent feedback from my wife, Leanne. Receiving feedback is hard, really hard. And Sheila is here to help us learn how to do a better job of it so we can grow and learn as human beings without getting caught up in the emotional drama while maintaining focus on what is true or not true about the feedback. And now I bring you Professor Sheila Heen. Sheila, thank you so much for being our guest on the Resilient Surgeon today. Really appreciate it.
I'm really excited about the conversation we're going to have. I think it's going to be fun.
I think so too. We'll do some personal exposure here in the near future after we cover some of the basis about feedback and the concepts, and we'll dig into my personal world a little bit, if you will.
Awesome. I can't wait.
I love doing, actually, believe it or not. So great. Well, we're talking about feedback, and I guess first things first, what the hell is feedback? I mean, it's a complicated subject, but what is it exactly?
Well, I think that the immediate thing that comes to mind for all of us are things like formal performance reviews, right? Grades, things particularly where you're getting evaluated. And that's included here, of course. But when we think about feedback, we really think about the bigger category. So feedback can be formal, but it's more often informal. It can be direct, but it can also be indirect. It can be spoken, but it also can be unspoken. Just the fact that I haven't gotten a response to that email I sent, like, is that feedback? Part of what's hard is just being able to tell, like, should I be taking something from this or not?
Right.
So there's this way in which feedback is really my relationship with the world and the world's relationship with me, and that the people around me are sending me signals all the time about the ways in which I am impacting them, for better and for worse. And the question is just whether or not we're paying attention.
Okay, so feedback is omnipresent.
Omnipresent. Yeah, we swim in an ocean of feedback.
Swim in an ocean of it. It's now that you point that out. Yeah. Well, one of the things you've talked about is
the feedback giver, or you've written about in your masterpiece. Literally, I mean masterpiece. It's the defining work on feedback. But you talk about the giver of the feedback and then the receiver. And I came away with the impression that it is heavily in my court as a receiver to manage the feedback properly. And your book outlines all the skills that are necessary to be able to do that. And by the way, not to take the words out of your mouth, but this ability is a skill. And that's the other thing I learned from your book. So what about that issue of the receiver versus the giver?
Yeah, so that really was the big aha moment for me too, which as
Mhm.
someone who teaches negotiation and difficult conversations, of course I'd spent years helping people become more skillful and thoughtful givers of feedback. And
The
it took a
normal
long
attention
the normal,
placed,
right?
normal, yeah.
Exactly. And if you look at all the books out there on feedback, all of them are about giving. Some of them, the title will say giving and receiving, but if you actually open the book, the sum total of receiving was like, just take the feedback. Say thank you and take the feedback.
And deal with it.
Right, deal with it. So it probably took us too long to suddenly come to the realization that actually giving is only half the equation,
Mhm.
and that in any exchange of feedback between a giver and a receiver, it's the receiver who's in charge.
Receivers in
Um,
charge. Yeah.
it's the receiver who decides what to make of what they're hearing or seeing,
Mhm.
and whether or not to change. And so we suddenly realized that receiving feedback is actually a distinct leadership skill, or maybe a bundle of skills, and that if you got better at being a feedback receiver, you automatically become a better giver, because you can
Mhm.
anticipate the reactions that you might get, and you can just have richer feedback conversations in all directions all the time.
Wow. I hadn't even thought of that angle. The fact that you learn to deal with it on your own gives you perspective on how somebody else is receiving it. I mean, it seems obvious now that you pointed out, but it had not occurred to me. Yeah.
I know. Well, it also it has become clearer and clearer to me over time how often I think I'm the giver, but but
Uh-huh.
weirdly, the other
Yeah.
person also thinks I should be the receiver.
Yeah.
That good feedback conversations are often a dialogue as we unpack, like, what am I noticing that I'm seeing impact somebody, and what, or I think be better, and then talking about, well, in what ways am I contributing to that also?
Right.
That maybe I should change something as well if we're collaborating and we're trying to have a better impact together.
Because it's always about the relationship, as you point out, to
I
some
think it is
extent,
always
right?
about the
Yeah.
relationship, including, it might be totally about you, Michael, because,
Hmm.
obviously you're the problem here. And
Yes.
um, whether or not you want my opinion or feedback, even if, I'm an authority figure where you officially have to take it,
Hmm. Hmm.
doesn't mean you actually receive it.
Hmm.
So I'm trying to influence you to be open to it. And then I might learn something along the way about, like, why are you doing it the way that you're doing it? Or
Hmm.
in what ways do
Hmm.
we think about this differently, or have different predictions about what different approaches would do for you? So even when we're really talking about you, we're also reflecting the ways in which my assumptions about what you should do come from me
Right.
and my own past experience.
Yeah. Yeah. And you said the word leadership. Can you elaborate a little bit on that? Because I do agree with that, but I wanted to highlight that.
Yeah.
It's a leadership skill. And I'm sure you don't mean applied just to people in positions of leadership. I mean, hi, CEOs, et
No,
cetera.
no, but wouldn't it be great?
Mhm.
Wouldn't it be great
Yes,
if they were better at
it
it?
would be. And
Ah,
yes, I'll
yes.
just stop there.
Yeah, exactly. We're done. We're done here. So, well, I
In our
totally
specialty.
agree with you that leadership does not depend on role or rank, that anyone can exercise leadership behavior.
Mhm.
And then when we do talk about role and rank, there's this funny paradox where the more and more senior you get, the bigger and bigger impact you have on everybody, and the fewer and fewer people are willing to tell you about it
Right.
because it feels so risky. So there's this funny way in which, as you become more senior and or more experienced, so maybe you didn't change roles, but you're more respected, maybe, or
Yeah.
have more
Mm-hmm.
influence
Mm-hmm.
informally. You actually need more and more advanced receiving skills to
Mm-hmm.
invite candid coaching from the people around you. So that leadership, your own capacity for leadership has to get more sophisticated and more skilled over time, no matter what.
To be able to get that feedback. Yeah.
To be able to invite that feedback and to create the kinds of conversations that invite other people to tell you what they're noticing. I mean, as a leader, one of the things I sometimes say is if you don't know what you should be working on, do you know who knows? Pretty much everybody else.
Everybody else. Yeah, they do.
Because they have a list, like this secret list they pass amongst themselves about the ways in which you make it harder for them to do their jobs.
Yeah.
But they don't want to tell you unless they think you want to know.
Yeah. That's going to come out in my 360 that we're going to review here.
Oh, good. I can't wait.
Yeah, yeah. And then one of the things I love that you can do as a leader that you talk about is to ask the one question.
Yeah.
Yeah. You want to tell us about that?
Yeah, the biggest daily change that I have made in my own life is rather than asking, hey, do you have any feedback for me? Which is the default
Open-ended
question.
torture
Open-ended.
question.
We think
Yeah.
we're being very inviting, but of course it's a very hard question to answer. Tortuous.
Yeah.
To instead asking, what's one thing? What's one thing that if I changed it would make a difference to you? What's one thing that if we changed it about this meeting, you think would make it more effective? You can adapt the question to whatever the context is, but the key is the what's one thing, first three words.
Mm-hmm.
And it just lowers the stakes. Like off the top of your head, what's on that list?
Yeah.
And you can have that conversation walking down the hall very quickly so that I don't think feedback, much of the time, I don't think feedback is about having more meetings.
Having another
It's
session.
right. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's who has time for more meetings? It's more how do I weave some simple practices into the way we work together day in
Right.
and day out
Yeah.
so that when we do sit down to assess our year end and hey, how do we think it's going? What do we think is working and what can we improve? We're just picking up on themes that we've already been talking about throughout the year.
Yeah. That in the book, It's Your Ship by Micah Brashoff, I had him on the podcast, a wonderful leadership book, ex-Navy captain. He did that on there. And what that engendered was an enormous sense of relationship building by simply asking that question. It goes a long way to make people feel like you care and that you care about their opinion too. So it has a flip benefit to it besides just learning about what the thing is.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. I love that you said that because I mean, feedback isn't a meeting, it's a relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And also that what's one thing question, one of the ways you can use it most powerfully is to go to the person with whom you have some friction,
Yes.
like the difficult quote unquote colleagues in your life and say, hey, what's one thing that if I changed it would make this easier or better? They will be stunned.
Yes.
And then, by the way, they'll be super honest in their answer
Yeah,
because,
that's
oh
right.
boy, they have a list for you, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And that actually can be a way to turn that relationship to start to be working towards something that's a little
Yeah.
easier
Yeah.
and more productive for both of you.
Right. Right. So you write in the book about people that actually like feedback or seek it out. Maybe liking is a bit strong for
Yeah,
some.
yeah.
I did enjoy it, but of course, as you will see, I dismissed some of it because it didn't seem to fit my profile that I thought I had. But you talk about life outcomes. People that are good at receiving feedback have good life outcomes. And can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, they do. And what is really interesting is that the studies that we include in the book are actually in the healthcare context,
Mm,
which is interesting. It was a colleague of ours up at Dartmouth Medical Center who teaches there who sent me these studies. So what the studies show is that people who seek out negative feedback, and by that the researchers mean they're curious, they're not just looking for a pat on the back or fishing for compliments. They're
yes.
looking for things that they can improve. So
Mhm.
they're asking for coaching in our language, how they could be better. People who seek that out proactively um, have higher job satisfaction. They adapt more quickly in new roles,
Mhm.
um, and they actually get higher performance reviews.
Mhm.
I suspect because they're signaling to people along the way, like, I'm still learning. Is this what you expected? What could be better here, et cetera? And so by the time they get to the performance review, not only have they already corrected a whole bunch of things or
Mhm.
adapted to a whole bunch of things, but also the people they're working with are just like, wow, this person's great. Like, they're so
Mhm.
relaxing to work with. I don't have to walk
Yeah.
around wondering whether I should say something or tell them
Pins and
or
needles.
feel
Yeah. Yeah.
on pins and needles, or I feel frustrated, but there isn't really an opportunity to let them know that. The experience of working with someone who is genuinely open and curious about how they can improve is relaxing, right? And fun. So it doesn't surprise me that they tend to
Yeah.
have better relationships with their colleagues and be more highly rated.
Yeah. I hope the listeners can just sort of actually picture that. Being in the room with someone who is resistant to feedback, may take it poorly. It's emotionally challenging,
Yeah,
to say the least.
yeah,
And if
I
somebody is
know.
receptive and curious, curiosity is the big word here, I think, for this thing, to be curious. It's a more open state of mind and receptive. And it feels good when you're around people like that.
It really does. And particularly if we each hold in our mind a person in our lives in one category and a different person in our lives in that other
Hmm.
category, the
Hmm.
contrast between them and how it feels to
Yeah.
be around them
Yeah.
is stark.
Stark. Very stark.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, let's just get into the blind spots here in my 360. You want to do
Yep,
that?
awesome. Yes, I do.
So,
Tell me
because,
about your experience with a 360 because I'm super curious about it.
all right, so I'll tell you the kind of the backstory on this. I was the program director of general surgery at the University of Minnesota,
Hmm.
and everybody there spent 2 to 3 years in the lab. And it was my contention that it was a shame that we had residents for 7 to 8 years to train them in general surgery, and we focused primarily, appropriately, on patient care and surgical skills. But we have these young people who we could help develop into leadership positions and leadership skills, teach them about how to live, et cetera, et cetera. We had a tremendously captive audience. And so I had an endowed chair, and I used my endowed chair money to create a leadership program for the residents. And so I found it's kind of a crazy story, but I used to be a big fan of the Four Seasons, and I went to them and they helped me figure out how to really bump up my patient experience process for my service. But I also queried them about leadership and did they know any leadership consultants? So they told me about somebody that did all their work for them, and I brought him in, paid him, and we did 360s and everything else. It's totally nascent program, that I basically had no idea really what I was doing, but I just wanted to pull it together and make it happen.
Yeah.
And he was great, and we did the 360s. And I, of course, had one on myself.
Mm, that's the fly in the ointment here.
Yeah, that's the fly in the ointment here. Yeah, yeah. Now, the kind of interesting part of this is I had the 360 prior to my retirement from clinical practice, and I'll get into that a little bit. But it was only later after I retired from clinical practice that I dug it up and really took it seriously. And we can kind of
Mm,
go through that as we go through it if you want.
mm,
Shall I start reading some of this stuff? Or what
please.
yeah.
Yeah, please.
Well, I feel the need to give you a few positive comments here before I go into the
Okay.
negative stuff.
Okay.
Yeah. I
Redeem
gotta
yourself
do the
first.
redeeming first.
Okay, good. We'll remember
Just
why
so
we're
everybody out
talking to
there,
you.
yeah,
Then
doesn't think I'm a complete
we'll hear what a
asshole.
horrible person you are. Yeah, keep
Yeah,
going.
yeah. So Visionary, inspiring. These now, by the way, I just want to say in the 360, there's areas of strengths that people can write comments about for those who
Yeah,
have not
yeah.
experienced this. And then the other one is areas for improvement, right?
Yes.
So,
Opportunities.
yeah, opportunities. So my comments are positive, visionary, inspiring, charismatic, bright, novel ideas, passion, very kind to the staff, and I'd let them operate on me anytime. I rigorously engage in self-analysis and introspection of my own behaviors, achievements, and weaknesses. A model of professionalism. All right. So I wasn't a complete loser. All right. That's all. Now,
For sure. And by
yeah,
the way, just what you've told us so far would tell all of us, the listeners, all of that. Because you took it upon yourself to be like, hey, we have a big opportunity here that we are not taking advantage of. And I don't really know how this is going to work, but let me seek out who could help us with this
the
and create
leadership
this
course.
nascent
Yeah.
leadership thing.
Yeah.
Like that
Yeah.
tells us you're a visionary, you care a lot, you're very introspective, etc. So we're bought in. So far, we're bought into this.
I hadn't thought about
Your
that, but good.
360 of listenership is on board.
So far, so good. All right. Now, they have a lot of numerical ratings in these 360s, and I found those very tedious and not helpful. But there were a couple that are worth. Now we're on to the quote areas for improvement.
Okay. Yep.
Confronts others skillfully. It was about a 3.2 out of 5, 1 to 5. Tries to
Oh,
understand what other people think before making judgments about them, 3.2 again. So those are the only numbers I'm going to throw out. But
okay.
here are some of the comments. Can bulldoze over others' concerns when he is passionate about a project. Strong-willed and can bowl over other colleagues that don't have as strong a presence as he does. Can be dictatorial towards dissenting opinions. Sometimes it seems as though his door is always open, but that he won't necessarily do much with the feedback that he is given if he doesn't agree with it. And I have to say that I basically agree with all of that. That's how I was. And my attitude at the time was, I got a lot of shit to get done here, and it's too bad if you don't like it. I got to push these
Right.
projects through,
Yeah. Yeah.
that was my stance. I'm sorry, but there's things to get done here. Now, here's the real kicker of the written thing that really had an impact on me. And I knew who wrote this too. Okay.
Of course.
Yeah.
We'll talk about that in just a moment. Yes.
All right, good. Dr. Mattis is simultaneously harsh and largely unyielding unless one is in near total agreement with him. Nevertheless, his overwhelming popularity is a testament of the potency of his personal strengths. Although a strong sense of self makes him courageous in many regards, I think his unshakable self-confidence and his sense of being right often closes him off to other perspectives that are gentler or quieter than his own. In some ways, he seems almost ruthless in his pursuit to make us strong, leaving a trail of somewhat crushed personalities, which I think he believes is good for us. And I did. I mean, I pushed them. These are going to be surgeons. I mean, this was my way of thinking.
I'm doing you a favor.
Yeah. The irony is that most of us would never complain because his approval, favor, and attention is so meaningful. And here's the real thing. One peer put it perfectly. He's like an abusive boyfriend who you absolutely adore, but can never be sure won't slap you.
Oh.
Yes.
Oh.
Yeah. And I believe I use this in talks now and stuff. I love it because it's so horrifying.
Yeah, it's memorable. It's very vividly described.
Yeah. And
so can I notice something?
Yeah, please.
Which is, I really hear in your initial reaction that you were describing to the feedback what is common for all of us, which is that we focus on our own intentions.
Yes.
And the positive impact we're trying to have. Like, I got stuff to get done, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm trying to make you stronger. So if you don't like it, you're not understanding that I am a well-intentioned person. I'm doing it only for your own good or the greater good.
Right.
And that's such a universal, is that they're describing the impact we're having, the bad impact, and we default to our good intentions as a way to sanitize or erase or mitigate that impact. And so it sounds like in the moment you had that defensive reaction, but say more.
Well, no, that's absolutely the case. I just blew it off. I just basically blew it off. And should I talk about that resident now a little bit?
Yeah, please.
Yeah. So it was a woman resident who was very gentle. All right.
Mm.
And not, she didn't fill the typical profile of a surgeon, kind of in your face, hustling, pounding, etc. And now she's become very well known for bringing mindfulness to the surgical world. I mean, she's become a major contributor and a great surgeon. And just again, that's just representative of my bias back at that time about what is a surgeon like, and I didn't recognize, and that's one of the things I've tried to correct, is to be able to see the potential in people that don't fit the paradigm of what I think they should be. But at the time, her gentler, easier, and she was always challenging me too on these things. She was always pushing me a little bit. And so therefore I just kind of dismissed it, but it did tweak me a little bit and lingered in my mind.
Yeah. Well, in that reaction, which is like, who said that?
Mhm.
Right? This one of the things that sometimes gives me pause about 360s, and I think they can be an incredibly powerful tool. And then they also are quite a blunt instrument,
Yes.
and are used in situations where this isn't the instrument I would choose, frankly, from the tray,
Mhm.
um, because they're anonymous usually. And so then when you get a piece of feedback that is confusing or upsetting, our mind instantly goes to who said that, partly because of the trigger around the we relationship trigger,
Mhm.
that we react to feedback based on who it's coming from, for better and for worse. And partly because it's like, I don't even know what to make of this. So like, who do I talk to better understand it?
Yeah, where do you go with
And
it? Yeah.
that's awkward. I just had a conversation this week actually with a friend who got some 360 feedback that he's like, I don't even know what to make of this. Like, it doesn't
Mhm.
make sense with what I think has been going on this year. But I don't even know how to figure out what they're talking about because I don't know who said it.
Yeah.
And so one of the suggestions I made to him is, if you have a couple of colleagues who you trust, going to them to say, I'm not asking who said this at all. I'm assuming whoever said it, it's correct or right from their perspective. I'm just trying to understand it. Can
Mhm.
you help me just understand what they might be talking about?
Yeah.
Because I want to take advantage of it, but I don't know what to make of it.
Right. Well, that gets at the heart of what I ended up doing here.
Mm,
Because at the time, as I told you, I kind of blew it off as it's just her, and
yeah.
I got work to do, right?
Right, right.
So I really, and another thing I'd love you to comment at some point on is about the wiring, because my wiring is water off a duck's back. I am absolutely like that. I
Yeah.
mean, I'm not somebody that's like, oh, I love this coffee. And, I mean, that kind of wiring that you talk about, like
Yes.
everything's just great. And, oh, the best coffee I've
Yes.
ever had. But
Yes.
I veer into that lane. There's no question about it.
Yeah. Well, so let's talk about wiring because that was one of the most interesting things that we learned, and I'm curious about your experience with it. So the short version is just when it comes to sensitivity to feedback, meaning how upset do you get and how long does it take you to either recover from negative feedback or like how long do you sustain the positive bounce
Right.
emotionally of positive feedback? The individuals, there's some evidence, individuals can vary by up to 3,000%.
Yeah. Staggering. And that's true in my marriage.
Ah, and
Big time.
you must be the even keel one.
Totally. Totally.
Yeah.
I'm the rock here. Crisis, no problem. I will deal with it. Everything's fine. It's going to be fixed.
Yeah. So we've
No,
got this
no
huge
hysteria,
range.
nothing. Yeah.
Yeah. So I love how you're describing the other hysteria. And even keel as being a rock. Yes. Um, so 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 you've got a whole huge range from people who are highly sensitive, to people who are insensitive, which is a slightly less
Yeah.
positive way to describe the less or more even keeled folks. And it's not that it's better to be one or the other. but there are different challenges depending on which end of that spectrum you fall
Right,
on. And then, of
right.
course, it's a challenge when you pair up with or work alongside or marry someone with the opposite.
Oh
So do
my
you want to
God.
say more about the pairing between you and your wife and how
Yeah,
in
yeah,
ways in which
yeah,
you're
yeah.
opposite?
Uh, I, there are times, just to talk about my wiring first, where I am flummoxed by the fact that somebody's reacting to this with that level of intensity. It could be my wife, it could be anybody. It's like, you got to be kidding,
Right. This is not
really?
that big a deal. You're
It's
totally
not that big a deal.
overreacting.
You're
Yes.
totally overreacting. What is the problem here,
Right. Which really helps them to react
Oh,
less,
they love it.
to
Yeah.
now be
Calm
judged about
down.
their
Yeah.
reaction.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. It's
Let me give
served
you
me well in the
feedback about
past.
your reaction to the
Yeah.
feedback. Yeah.
Yeah. And my wife, and she knows I'm talking about this, so there's not some, hidden agenda here. Uh, she, if there's a loud noise, she goes through the ceiling. Okay.
Yes.
Literally. The composting bowl in our kitchen, if I don't have that covered up, the smell as she walks in is hard on her. All right. And it took
Yeah.
me a
Yeah.
long time to say, God damn, she's different. This is not just her belly aching. She actually experiences these things in a really significant way. And she's fearful, about things, and she's always red alerting. And so then for, somebody like me, the water up the duck's back guy, I don't take a lot of it seriously, though, therefore she doesn't feel listened to or heard.
Yeah.
And, this has been the cycle. And until I finally started listening to her and acknowledging, and so she was clear that I hear her concern,
Mm.
that
Yep.
changed a lot of our relationship in a big way. It calmed her down, and it made things much better for us. But it was really a long-term big struggle for us.
So it sounds like the ways in which you've each adapted to each other have helped things be less volatile for her, right?
Yes.
Or for her to come back to a more even keel place a little bit faster
Yeah.
if she really
Yeah.
feels heard,
Yep.
etc. Are there things that have helped you be a little more reactive? Because one of the challenges of being undersensitive to feedback is either you don't get the people who are trying to give you feedback because they're being a little indirect, and water off the duck's back also means the duck doesn't feel
Yeah.
the water at all, doesn't
Right.
even
Right.
understand that there's a
Yeah.
topic here. But the other is that because memory is so correlated with emotion, if you, and I'll say we, because I'm at your end of the spectrum as well, if we don't have a very big emotional reaction to the feedback, it can be hard actually to remember it. So we're like, oh yeah, I'll work on that. And then by the next week, we've forgotten about it.
Yeah,
And so it
exactly.
doesn't stick in
It
the
doesn't
same
stick.
way.
Yeah. Yeah.
Are there things that have where you've moved a little bit to help things stick
For
or
me,
get through?
you mean to get through to me?
Yeah,
Well, this will get at the core sort of dynamic between her and me. And maybe if I tell you a vignette,
please.
yeah, and this is a little tough, but so I've got a little, one example is, well, my wife, first of all, she's somebody that is very conscious of what people think about her, very, as my daughters are too, and more so than me for sure. But on the flip side, she will tell you like what she's thinking, like with a hammer. I mean,
Mm,
there's no subtlety in her delivering the piece of information that she thinks you need. I mean, it's right straight upside the head. So
and is that just with you and people inside the family or with everybody?
no, it's more ubiquitous. When she is
Okay. Yep.
triggered by something or activated, it comes out forcefully.
Yeah.
And
Yep.
and the personality profiles, I'm extraordinarily agreeable, you know,
Mm-hmm.
and composed, but I can tell you that she would be very non-agreeable and more confrontational, when things
Mm-hmm.
get going.
Mm-hmm.
And so like all our time together, she just kind of nails me with what she thinks I need to do. like you gotta cut your nose hairs. You gotta trim your nose hairs, all right? Or I mean, just and then I wouldn't do it
Yep.
just to spite her, because you're right, but God damn it,
Yeah, exactly. You're right. And I'm going to purposely
I'm gonna just blow
ignore.
it off. Yeah.
That's right.
But another recent example is, I've got a little esophageal dysmotility here, and occasionally if I don't, and I love food, and so occasionally if I um, don't chew my food well enough, it will get stuck. So about a week ago, a piece of meat got stuck in my esophagus, and I had to go to the bathroom, and it's really quite embarrassing because we're eating dinner, and I got to go to the bathroom, and I'm in there waiting until this thing comes out, right?
Oof. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it makes my wife anxious. She's nervous about me being in there, and all this stuff, understandable. And then,
Uh-huh.
yeah, so I'm finally got the chunk of meat out, spit it out into the toilet, right? And
Yep.
she comes she comes over to me. I'm sitting there on the edge of the bed, like recovering, and she said,
Yeah.
"You need to chew your food better." And she is serious.
Newsflash. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
duh.
Yeah.
But I'm like, oh, I'm sitting here, I'm just recovering from this. And you talk about the who, what, when, how, wow, and where and
Yeah.
all
Yeah.
that. Yeah.
Yeah.
And the thing that I have learned to do with her is, and this was so difficult, was to be able to dissect that little, like panning for gold. There's all this water and shit all over, and I find that little nugget, of okay, I really should listen to this. And I did that. I had to say to myself, God, I was so angry because she came at me like that at my moment where I'm struggling and
Yeah.
recovering.
Yeah. Yeah. Kick me while I'm
Nothing,
down.
nothing new. But then I realized, she's right. I need to chew my food better, and God damn it, pay attention to that. But
Yeah.
this is the challenge. So I don't know what your comments are about all of that or observations.
Yeah. Well, the shift that you're describing is really the shift from our natural inclination, which is that when somebody comes at us with coaching, unsolicited
It's
advice,
coaching.
unneeded advice, while we're there, like, recovering,
Yeah,
and not when we need, not when we need it. Um, the impulse is to listen for what's wrong with it, right? So when feedback is incoming, I'm listening for what's wrong with it. Who's saying this, and do they know what they're talking about?
right.
What they're saying, is that really what happened? Is that good or bad advice? Would it really work? Is it something I already know? So, like, what's the problem? And that comes to why they're saying it. Like, what's their motivation? Are they really on my side, or they have their own agenda and this is really about them, for instance?
Mhm.
When they said it was ridiculous. Really, you can't even wait till I've recovered
I
and
know.
come
That's the
back to
part
the
that gets me
table?
so angry. Yeah, I know.
Yeah, like, really, you're gonna bring this up at my mother's funeral, honestly?
Yeah. But
So
let's just be
just
clear,
the
that's very
win.
common. That's very common.
Super common.
Super
Like,
common.
really,
Yeah.
on a Friday,
Yeah.
night?
Yeah.
Um, really, on a Monday, when you're gonna ruin
Yeah.
my whole week? I mean, really, there's no good time, but this was really a bad time. Um, and how they brought it up, right?
Yeah.
Did you really have to be that
Yeah.
blunt or
Yeah.
indirect or whatever? We're not happy with how they brought it up or said it. And so if I can find what's wrong with it, the who, what, when, why, when, how, and where, well, then I can, like, safely set it aside and relax and go on with my life. And the shift and the problem, of course, is that we're always going to be able to find things wrong with the feedback that we get.
Yeah.
It could
Yeah.
be 90% wrong, but it's that little speck of gold, that 10%
Yeah.
of what might be right about it, that is the value. So shifting from what's wrong with this to what might be right about it, can I listen for that and own that, has made the biggest difference for me. And it means negotiating with myself in those moments.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
And in her defense, I would say I'm not somebody that necessarily listens all the time, because I blow it off. It's
Yes.
no big deal, what's a big
Yes.
deal, but
Yes.
we all as a family recognize that when she gets in that mode, there's almost always something in there that is you got to listen to because she's right about something, it's inevitable. That's the case.
And I love that you brought that up, because her statement, which was, we're assuming you're paraphrasing it, like, you got to chew your food. Come on. You just got to chew better. Like, that's the phrase, but packed into that are all kinds of things.
Yeah.
It's like,
Yeah.
that was really scary.
Yeah, I talked to her
You
about
know,
that. I said, I can
you're
imagine how scared you are when I'm
freaking
in there
me
gagging
out.
up. Yeah, yeah,
Yep. And by the way, you know this as well as anybody. And by the
yeah.
way, I've reminded you again and again, and you still don't listen.
Yes,
And do you
exactly.
care about the
Yeah,
impact this has on us? Yeah,
yeah,
it's all that stuff is sitting under the feedback.
yeah, yeah.
So listening to understand what is the giver really trying to say. Feedback usually arrives in these vague phrases, and there's so much packed into it. And to
So
really
much packed in
understand
there.
and to
Yeah.
see what they're trying to say, it really requires a dialogue. Um, and as a receiver, one of the things we talk about is you can ask questions either looking backward, like
Mhm.
some bunch of things have happened that have led you to say this to me, or there's an impact that you're worried about, or you had an expectation that I would handle it differently in some way. Like, help me understand what's prompted you to say this to me. In your case here, that's pretty obvious, but sometimes it's
Yeah,
really
it's
not
fairly
obvious.
obvious. Yeah, no, yeah,
Um,
yeah.
or you can ask questions looking forward, like, okay, well, if I were to follow your advice, what would I do differently? Here,
Mhm.
it's pretty
Pretty clear. Chew your
clear.
damn food.
Chew your damn food, at least a few more, rounds. But often people will say these maddeningly vague things like, you're too nice, or, you need to be more proactive, or
Mhm.
you need to be more,
Mhm.
patient centric. It's like, what? You need to work on your bedside manner. Okay,
Yeah,
that doesn't help me. Like,
it's
what
too vague.
specifically
Yeah.
would I change? And when would I change it? When are the key moments where you see me miss an opportunity? And that actually can get a really great dialogue going with, like, oh, what are you picturing and suggesting in more concrete terms?
Yeah, and you talk about using questions like help me understand more
Mm-hmm,
about what you're
mm-hmm.
saying, kind of to draw them out, and so you don't create a conflicting or conflict in the process, to draw them out.
Yeah, and I think that the other thing that is easy to do is, as we're listening to other people's feedback for us, we feel pressure to agree or disagree with it in the moment.
Mhm.
And our recommendation that we've come to is, like, set aside the question of whether you agree or disagree, because that's not actually helping you right now. And just first try to understand it. So help me understand, how often this comes up. Help me understand what impact you see it having that you're worried about, et cetera, et cetera. Talk to me about ways other people handle this, because I don't have
Right,
visibility into that.
right.
Um, all of those are good questions that help me just better understand my giver. Help me understand questions are all just in service of, I'm just trying to understand what you're suggesting, where it's coming from, and where it's going, and what your experience suggests is more successful, etc. Later, I can decide whether I agree or disagree,
Mhm.
but I don't have to decide that now. Later, I can decide, well, there was a nugget there that actually is
Yeah.
worth thinking about and maybe working on.
Again, that for me, the operative word here is curiosity.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Also, we have a nice metaphor here, which is that you just need to chew on the feedback a little bit longer.
Very good. I love it. Oh, that is brilliant. I love it. That's fantastic. Yeah, yeah. Well, and we'll leave my wife alone now for a little bit, but I
We
do
all know
want
she's
to.
right. So yes,
She's
that's
right, and she
important.
is right.
Yes.
Yeah, and maybe return to the 360 here. All right.
Mm.
So, um, I dismissed kind of all that stuff, and then unfortunately, I ended up after a big back operation and hip troubles, addicted to prescription narcotics. And I
Oof,
ended up
yeah.
going to Hazelin for 3 months. And I
Mm-hmm.
came out of Hazelin, and I was about 56, and I decided to leave my clinical career. And so I became a house husband for a couple of years and talk about identity shifts and stuff. But I was uh, it was obviously a big seismic event, and in an effort to try and understand where I went wrong because I was so disturbed by the fact that that happened to me, and what were the patterns or things that I was doing that led to that. And of course, I had such a sense of personal responsibility that I somehow must have done something wrong. Never mind the fact that the narcotics are so addictive,
Right.
and I had free access to them before the narcotic crisis. But anyway, I'm sitting at home trying to figure it out, and I look at my personality test, and I'm trying, what's wrong with me? And then I remember I had this 360, and I pull it out, and I read that, and I thought, God damn, maybe there's something here to this comment.
Mhm.
And so I decided to send it to my children and see what they thought, because they'd
I
be
love
probably
this.
pretty, but I emailed
Yeah.
it to them. I didn't do it in face to face, because that could be intimidating.
Hmm.
And so 4 of the kids responded. Maya said, "Oh yeah, that was your dictator phase."
Mm.
Max, my son, I can't tell you anything. All I knew I would hear is buck up, move past it. This is nothing.
Mm.
Mike said the slap sentence was perfect, essentially unapproachable.
Wow.
Yeah. And then they both said they didn't hate me. They had enormous respect and love, but they just couldn't come to me with their problems because I minimized them and didn't take them seriously.
Mm.
My son Sam, who's like one of the most introverted people I've ever known in my life, says like 5 words per day. His only response was, "Yep."
That captures it. I
Yeah, he
mean,
just wrote back, "Yep."
yep. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I was like, okay, this is a problem. That's not how I want to be as a father, and I made a major concerted effort to change that. And so I had to drop my tendency to want to fix everything. Every time they came to me, let's just solve the problem. Didn't hear them. I didn't listen. I didn't have good listening skills in a real way to hear them and what their struggles were. And so I really, at the beginning, it was just I had to shut my mouth and be quiet and listen and work on trying to allow them to express themselves and develop some psychological safety around our relationship. And it worked profoundly. I mean,
Mm.
it changed. This is why I wanted to highlight this, because this change based on the 360 and this feedback is probably one of the most important and gratifying changes that I've made in my way of dealing with people, that has brought so many deep benefits. My level of connection with my wife and children is off the charts compared to what it used to be. They now come to me with everything, and they know they can talk to me about things, and I actually listen. And I'm not making this up. I mean, this is something they talk
Right.
about.
Yeah.
It's out
Yeah.
in the open.
And
And
were you explicit with them that I am working on this or I would like to change this?
I I am sure I was, because I am like that.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I said I actually probably apologized, you know.
Yes.
Yeah. And I even
Yeah.
apologized to my son Sam, who I said, I really don't think I saw you for the person you are when you were a teenager. I didn't really see you. I saw you as a kid. I got to get you functioning and out into the world, and this is what you got to do, et cetera, et cetera. The kind of the standard parenting trap that we can fall into. And so it was a profoundly important piece of feedback for me.
So I love that, and it really underscores the power for leaders to learn out loud
Hmm.
and to ask for help, to say, look, I think I've got a couple things I'm going to change. I'm going to fall back into old ways. I need your
Hmm.
help.
Hmm.
I'm giving you permission to call me on it, right? Or
Hmm.
remind me
Hmm.
when I interrupt or I jump in, or it sounds like I'm not really hearing how hard this is.
Right. Yeah.
Um, and that move to invite people in to let them know what you are working on and how they can help you work on that is a really powerful move, and it accelerates your learning curve and it changes the relationship.
Dramatically. Yeah. Dramatically. Yeah.
It also illustrates something that has been helpful to me in my darkest moments, which is this idea of the second score. So the first score is the feedback that you get,
Hmm.
right? Which would have been from the resident and also then from your kids affirming it,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Yep,
Yeah.
sounds right. The second score is how you respond to that feedback.
Hmm.
And the most important thing isn't whether you get a D, in the first instance. It's whether you get an A and how you handled the D.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
I
I
will
think
say
that's
it was,
helped. Yeah. When I react to a D, I'm like, oof, that's painful. But now am I going to double down on that D, or am I going to decide to
yeah,
really handle
yeah,
this piece of feedback well
yeah.
in the next, however, few weeks and months?
It's really no different than the meat chewing in many ways. You get triggered, it feels hard,
Mm-hmm.
but the mental strength, because I believe it is mental strength to face it
Mm-hmm.
and contend with it and work on it and see if there's truth in it is hard. But God, like anything, if it's hard, it often is very rewarding to do. It's just I think one of the most important skills you can have is to be able to digest this sort of thing and learn from it and grow from it.
Well, and what the beautiful thing about it is that the people around you want you to be able to do that,
They do, and
right?
they
So it's
love
like
it.
everybody is on your side
Yeah,
in hoping you will
yeah.
change
Yes,
and grow.
please, please.
Please, quick.
I'm begging you. Yes, very good idea. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. And like the worst thing that you could have on your tombstone is like, you
Yeah,
know, he was who he was and he never changed.
yeah,
The opportunity is so omnipresent in the relationships that we have, and how rare it is for us to really take that invitation
yeah,
and invite other
yeah.
people into it with us.
Big
It's very
deal.
cool.
And I'm gonna take the liberty of reading what my son Sam ultimately wrote about me and the
Ooh,
changes. Yeah.
oh, good.
You cracked the code. Now, this is several years after my inquiry to them,
Okay. Yep.
Yeah. So it took time. Sam, you cracked the code when you started to patiently and with compassion make an honest effort to understand why someone, and again, yourself included, might be thinking or doing something. You search for the true source of anxiety, excitement, anger, etc. in yourself and others without judgment, because you know that these sources are a universal truth to all humans, however up they may seem when given breath to.
Mm, mm,
That alone gives you an incredible opportunity to self-correct, but also an incredible opportunity to be productive and thoughtful and helpful as a father, husband, mentor, friend, and even as a stranger. And, to get that from my son, who's the introvert,
wow.
was really
Yeah.
powerful. Yeah.
We love Sam. That
Yeah.
was beautiful.
And
That was beautiful. Yeah. What were you going to add?
just, um, I don't read that to pat myself on the back. I read it to
Mm,
hopefully show the power of taking some of this stuff seriously and working on it and the impact that it can have on your relationships in all walks of your life.
yeah. And I think sometimes we notice things about our relationships that we wish were different, and then we just stick with the noticing and don't
Hmm. Hmm.
step in to think, well, what am I contributing to that? And do I want to have a conversation about it? And or do I want to just change my own contribution as an experiment and see what might happen?
Right.
And you're reminding me of when my eldest first went to college, first kid leaving home, and we're all worried about how he's going to adjust and all this. And
Right.
so like the week after I drop him off, um, I get a text from him, and I'm in a meeting in Dallas with clients and colleagues, and the text says, do you have time to talk? And
It's
I
always
thought,
an
yes, I do.
anxiety
Yes,
provoking.
absolutely
Yes.
right now. Yes, I do.
Yeah.
I will call you. So I excuse myself from the meeting, and I step out into the hall and I call him, and he needs graph paper. And the college bookstore doesn't have the right kind. And so could I order him some of the right kind of graph paper on Amazon, et cetera? And
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
like,
Yeah. Yeah.
oh my God, I excused myself from a meeting for a graph paper emergency. And so I say to my husband when I get home, so here was the text and conversation I had with Ben today. And he's like, oh, I've been talking about Ben about all kinds of things. And I'm like, well, how come he's talking to you about the good stuff and I'm the graph paper emergency? I started noticing the ways in which I'm the logistics person in our family to
Yes.
make things
Yes.
happen. And I thought,
That's
well,
me. That's me.
I don't like that role anymore. Like I
Yeah.
don't mind the
Right.
role, but I don't want that to be the sum total of what they're going to reach out to me for.
Yeah.
So how do I regraph the relationship
Yes.
to include talking about the real stuff?
Mhm.
And so I just started sharing a little bit of the real stuff for me and asking slightly different questions um, when I would call. And I think it's taken several years, but now they text me about like what's really going on.
Yes. Yes.
And that
Yes.
is um so rewarding, so much
So
more
rewarding.
rewarding,
Yes. Yeah.
yes, than being the person who does the plane tickets and the,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
whatever, the graph paper ordering.
Well, it's a little off topic, but you said sharing a little bit more about you. And that's, see, as I said, I'm not afraid to, I mean, I just put it out there. This is reality. I'll talk about anything.
Yeah.
And so I tell them, I talk about death, sex, you name it. I'm 70. I talk about the end's coming, it's not that
Yeah.
far off, I'm not afraid to face these things. And that realistic and honest, open conversation with them has just, it helps them to become more comfortable talking about it. And it really just deepens the relationship profoundly.
Yeah, and it means that the conversations are way more interesting.
Oh yeah, it's so much fun. So
It's
much
so
fun.
much fun.
Yeah.
It's so much fun. I think the question of where is the latent potential in our relationships for just more interesting and meaningful
Mhm,
conversations
mhm.
is also all around us. And nobody has time to do that all of the time, but the capacity to do it when it
Is
matters the
there.
most
Yeah.
is there, if we can co-develop it.
Yeah.
And you have it because you have it in spades in the following relationships. So the question is, are there other relationships where I want to take this capacity to exercise it? Because somehow
Mhm.
between the two of us, in any relationship with another human, we quickly wear a groove of what we talk about and what we don't.
Yes. Yeah.
And do I want to change that groove? That's going to take some effort and it's going to take some time, but what potential is there for this to be even better?
Yeah. And it makes me think that, because one of the things I've thought a great deal about is managing that transition from parent to adult human being and the
Mm-hmm.
relationship shifting. So they don't
Mm-hmm.
really see me as a parent anymore, but as a as a friend, colleague. And I think friend is a reasonable thing to think of when they're adults, that
Yeah.
transition into that space. And those kinds of conversations are the way in my opinion, to that.
Yeah, that's a really great observation that our role with them over time appropriately shifts
Right.
into a peer role and also
Here.
a
Yeah.
role that they have to choose,
Hmm.
right? When they're living in your house, they can't get away from you sometimes, although
Yeah.
they do a pretty darn good job of finding ways to do it. But as adults, they have to decide that they want to spend more time with us,
Yeah.
in conversation or in spending time together. And so how do we build the kind of relationship that makes that appealing for them
Yeah.
as well as for us?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting because a colleague of mine at the Harvard Negotiation Project, a guy named Dan Shapiro, wrote a book with Roger Fisher, who wrote Getting to Yes, our
Hmm.
boss and mentor, called Beyond Reason, but it looks at the role of emotion in working relationships and personal relationships. And they talk about 5 things that we want in our relationships with other people. So I think of them as sort of relational interests we have. And their autonomy, like what do I get to control and decide?
Right.
Um, what do we have to decide together, et cetera. We each have assumptions about how much autonomy we should have. Affiliation. Am I in or am I out? Do I have a sense of belonging and connection, or do I find out about things in a roundabout way? Am I invited to the meetings I think I should be invited to?
Hmm.
Appreciation. Do people
Mhm.
understand and appreciate the value I bring around here and how hard I'm working? Status. So do I feel that people are giving me the right amount of deference or taking my opinion seriously enough? And that can vary like moment to moment and topic to topic.
Sure.
In other words, on this topic, I actually know what I'm talking about, and you should be
Yeah.
listening
Yeah.
and weighing my opinion pretty heavily. On this topic, I don't know what the hell I'm talking about. So like I would defer to you. And we have assumptions about the ways in which people should be weighing our opinion that are almost unconscious, but we notice them right away when they're not there. And then the last is role. And that's both formal roles and informal roles. Like who in the family makes the plan
Yeah.
and which ones of us wait to be told the plan.
Yeah.
And nobody applied for those jobs, but we definitely know which
We
ones we
got
have.
them. We got
We
them.
got them, right?
And
And
yeah.
we want to roll in the relationship and in the group that we like and that we're good at and is valued. So if any of those are missing, like, yeah, I'm good at it and it's valued, but I hate doing it. Like, why am I always the person who has to fill in the blank? So those five, when there's friction in the working relationship, often it's because we're stepping on each other's toes. We have different assumptions about, or one of us or both of us feel underappreciated or left out.
Mhm.
Or turf wars are often clashes of autonomy.
Mhm.
But circling back to the parenting relationship, if you want practice noticing those in motion during the teenage and young adult years, they're all in flux, right? Like the teenager thinks they should have more autonomy than we believe that they should have.
Mhm.
They want
Mhm.
way less affiliation with us.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Like don't have nothing to do with us one moment and then maybe feel reconnected in the next moment, right? You don't really appreciate what my life is like and what's going
Right.
on. You don't get it. And our status is shifting in terms of, and our role is shifting in terms
Right.
of, am I the
Yeah.
person who gets to tell you what to do, or am I someone who's giving you some input,
Mhm.
or I'm a sounding board for you.
Yeah.
And so anyway, this is all to say that that's set as a checklist for me to understand, okay, what's going wrong here, and then what do I want to shift or that we have different assumptions about. It has been a really helpful diagnostic checklist
Oh, I can
for me
imagine,
to
just to be
understand.
able to name those things and see them in the
Yeah,
dynamic. Huge.
yeah,
Huge.
yeah.
Yeah.
It's a tool that I use quite frequently.
So I have not seen that book before, but I'm going to get it and maybe ask him on the podcast.
Yeah, you should. Let me
Yeah, I
know.
will.
I'm happy to introduce the two of you.
All right, great.
Yeah, he does a lot of international work, and those are operating, of course,
Yeah,
internationally as well as
yeah,
within
yeah,
organizations
yeah.
and families.
Well, Sheila, it's been an honor and a delight again to have you on the podcast. And I appreciate your willingness to venture down the lane of my personal struggles and learn from that. Yeah.
I've loved the way in which you were willing to just talk about the real stuff
Hmm.
so that we could have a candid conversation about the ways in which it's hard for all of us and it's playing out all the time in our lives
Yeah.
as humans. Humans have just an unbelievable capacity for cruelty and
Yes.
dismissal and
Yes.
isolation and defensiveness, but we also have an even bigger capacity for curiosity and resilience and
Yeah.
learning and growth and
Yes.
connection. And the question is just, how am I showing up? How am I showing up as a leader, whether that's a title or a stance,
Yeah. Yeah.
with the people around me when it matters most?
Beautifully put. It's a perfect ending note. Really beautiful.
Hmm.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thanks for having me.
It was wonderful. Thank you so much, Sheila. Oh, I do want to highlight
Yep.
Sheila is one of the founders of the Triad Consulting Group. And if you go to their website, there are enormous resources there that are available if you want to work on these skills. And of course, there's the book, but there's great resources there to really dig into this and learn these skills. Anything else you want to add to that?
Yeah, I'm glad that you thought of that because there's a nav called Help Yourself. And it has resources for thanks for the feedback. It also has the 3rd edition of Difficult Conversations, which
Yeah.
has just
Yep.
recently come out, and like a reader's guide and discussion questions that you can use,
Yeah.
and a prep sheet to get ready for an important conversation.
Yeah, excellent. Anything else? Any other place they can find you? The more information? LinkedIn?
I'm on LinkedIn,
Mhm.
and I gave a TED talk about
Yep.
thanks for the feedback.
Yeah.
So that's easy to find online as well
Yeah.
for an overview.
Yeah. Great.
An overview, but this was a much more applied conversation, so they
Yeah.
will complement
Yeah.
each other, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, they will.
Yeah.
All right, Sheila, thanks so much.
Thank you.
This has been The Resilient Surgeon, a podcast brought to you by the Society of Thoracic Surgeons. Thank you so much for listening. If you like this podcast, please rate it 5 stars and let your friends, trainees, and colleagues know about it. On social media, you can use the hashtag #BeYourBestSelf. More information about the Society of Thoracic Surgeons is available online at sts.org.